I'm Susan Siu from the Women's Center of Change, and formerly also with the Breastfeeding Consumer Environment Movement. When the Bhopal syndrome happened, the consumer movement was very active in staging protests and helping the victims. And a lot of them were also women. So you talked about efficiency, equity, and ethics, and also a new level of knowledge. I would like to hear your perspective on sensitivities to its gender construction and how policies are looking at marginalized population, especially women and children, not just as beneficiaries, but also involved in the policy-making level. We also know that in a lot of issues like poverty and HIV, whether at the UN or government level, people are always saying feminization of poverty, and yet in the policies, it's not so gender sensitive. And I'd like to hear your views on that. And lastly, I love Gandhi and his quotes, and I'd like to share that if the people will lead, the leaders will follow, and that's what Gandhi said.
First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Parthiban from USM. Thank you so much, Prof, for the wonderful, insightful lecture. My question is quite straightforward. It actually, with regards to poverty. Now, you did touch on poverty just now. Now, lately, there are numerous literature on climate change and poverty. Now, it's clear that how the effect of poverty, effect of climate change on rural poverty. Now, there are a lot of studies on climate on urban poverty. So, and how do you relate this to sustainable development? Could you elaborate on that further, sir? Thank you.
Mine is not a form of question. I mean, it's like, my name is Eddie, and I used to be a businessman, and I've called it early retirement right now. Yeah. So I would like, first of all, I would like to applaud the initiative taken by the Penang government. I mean, it's like for organizing this talk, because most government will definitely, I mean, it's like be talking more on mega projects and GDP figures, as opposed to something like this. I would like to add on to what Dr. Wu have just said. I think it's very important that, I mean, it's like we cannot make today's decision based on yesterday's realities. I mean, such a colonized mindset is very dangerous for, I mean, for economic and social development. And apart from that, I think, I mean, it's like we need to learn outside of our boundaries on what actually works out there in order to solve some of the issues that we have here. To tackle this issues of sustainability, I think it's imperative that we let our minds and heart travels anywhere. Yeah. No, I'm not actually adding to the question. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we are running out of time.
Yeah.
Because the governor is waiting.
Oh, sure. Okay. It's all right.
Sorry to cut you off.
I believe a consumer movement is very important because, after all, in any system of government or any tenets of society, the consumer is king. And I would modify that to say the consumer is queen, because one has to be gender sensitive, and in any case, most consumption decisions are taken by women. I mean, they run the household, they do everything. So I think she has to be the queen. I think it's entirely true that we are living in an age where information flows are very rapid and instantaneous. And you don't even have to have demonstrations on the street to be able to arouse a consumer response. These can easily be organized through the internet by connecting electronically. And I think the time has come when people have to sort of bring their thoughts together and create movements of this kind. So I really don't know what else to say, but when it comes to people who are marginalized, then I think they have to somehow be included in terms of hearing their voices in a variety of ways. That goes without saying. On the question that was asked about poverty and rural poverty and how climate change is affecting that, you know, unfortunately, climate change is really bad news for the poor, because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the wherewithal, they don't even have the information by which they can protect their lives and property. And some of the worst impacts of climate change are going to take place, are taking place on the poorest of the poor. You know, we had assessed, for instance, in Africa, there are certain countries where agricultural yields could go down to about 50% as early as 2020 as a result of climate change and climate variability. So these people who produce just about enough to take care of their own needs would be very badly hit. There are also problems of water stress which are becoming widespread, and it's the poorest of the poor who are the worst affected. So I would say that climate change is going to reduce the ability of rural populations in several places in the world to be able to develop on a sustainable basis. And this is something that we have to be sensitive to. So I think I'll leave it at that. But I do want to say that I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier. I think intragenerational equity issues are just as important as intergenerational issues. And as responsible citizens and members of human society, we really need to be sensitive to these issues, not only for people in other countries, in our own countries as well. We are tolerating far too much inequality and inequity, and I think that over a period of time is not only ethically wrong, but it can even be dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to conclude by reminding ourselves of the well-known story of putting a frog inside a jar of water and then increasing the temperature of the water at a very slow rate, let's say half a degree over a period of a day. We know that the frog will not jump out, and the frog ends up being boiled, cooked. I like sometimes to think about what's the mental processes going on inside the frog before its goose was cooked. Was it self-denial, the natural human tendency to avoid facing unpleasant truths? Or is it self-censorship? The frog dare not ask the person to stop putting on the heat, largely because if he asks, he'll be beaten to a pulp. So leading that self-censorship. I think that on the issue of climate change, the work of Rajendra Kumar Pachauri has now made it impossible for the major actors to instill self-denial and self-censorship in the general population. Oil companies now no longer openly finance studies that question the phenomena of climate change. Most authorities in the world now no longer suppress court discussions on green accounting of GDP. Your work, sir, has restored optimism in me about our future because it has freed us from two fears. The first fear is the internally generated fear of that leads to self-denial. And the second fear you free us from is the externally induced fear that leads us to self-censorship. So I'm very glad to welcome to Penang somebody whose work has broken the fears of self-denial and self-censorship on the issue of climate change. Thank you for coming.
Thank you everyone very much for the questions. I'd like to just extend an invitation for both of you to remain on stage. May I now invite Zariel on stage to present a gift on behalf of Penang Institute to Dr. Rajendra Pachari. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming and have a good afternoon.